handle the stormiest days in your life. Today we'll find out just how Jesus did.
Well, hey, OneChurch, we're so glad that you have joined us today, and what a special day it is. It's Mother's Day. We would love to wish all of the mothers out there just a wonderful day with your families. We think you're beautiful, we think you're amazing, and we think you are rocking it through this quarantine time, being home with your family. Here's a reminder to stay connected. Text Connect 1C to 97,000, and you'll be up to date with everything OneChurch. Today, you're going to hear a couple of worship songs, and we encourage you to worship with your family right where you're at. After that, we're going to hear part 2 of Hope in the Dark. Kim is bringing a great lesson for all of us today. We're so glad that you have joined us.
Shame is gone. I won't be shackled to the way I was. Oh, I'm gonna live like my chains are gone, gone. Now my sin is dead and gone, and I sing hallelujah. Oh, done, done. He is risen. That will overcome. Oh, I'm gonna shout like the battle's won. Fall back, devil, 'cause your time is up. I'm gonna live like the stone is gone, gone. Now my sin is dead and gone, and I sing hallelujah. Oh, done. He is risen, it is done, and I sing hallelujah. Yeah. How great the power of the blood. Oh, 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 oh. I am the righteousness of God. Oh,
And there I find you in the mystery. An ocean steep, my faith will stand. And I will call upon your name and keep my eyes above the waves. When oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace. For I am yours, and you are mine. Oh, you are mine. Oh, your grace abounds in deepest waters. Your sovereign hand be my guide. Your feet may fail and fear surrounds me. You've never failed, and you won't start now. Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters wherever you would call me. And take me deeper than my feet could ever wander. And my faith will be made stronger in the presence of my Savior. Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters wherever you would call me. And take me deeper than my feet could ever wander. And my faith will be made stronger in the presence of my Savior. Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters wherever you would call me. And take me deeper than my feet could ever wander. And my faith will be made stronger in the presence of my Savior. I will call upon your name and keep my eyes above the waves. My soul will rest in your embrace, for I am yours, and you are mine. Oh, you are mine.
And now we are going to continue in our worship time and worship with our giving. If we were at the theater, this would be the time that we would pass the red buckets. But there are still several ways for you to give. You can text, you can use the app, you can give online, or you can mail it in. Because you are so generous with your giving, we are able to partner with organizations and do good in the community. And on May 16th at 10 a.m., we're going to have a mobile pantry in the parking lot of the Regal Theater with Manna Cafe. We're going to need some volunteers to help with this as well. So if you're interested, please email Carlo at oneChurch.tv.
You know, pain is a lonesome place. I don't have to tell you, do I? It'll drop a rock in your stomach right through your pounding heart. And when your knees are so weak, you hit the ground, and you finally realize you don't got this. Well, now you might just make it. You see, the tallest tree may not weather the storm, but its roots do. So dig in, stand up, and let the wind blow. Because there's hope.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kim. Thank you so much for joining us here today at oneChurch.tv for part 2 of our series called Hope in the Dark. We're so glad to have you with us today. Perhaps you've had a day kind of like Chippy. Chippy was a happy little guy whose world was pretty much the same every single day until the day that it wasn't. In Max Lucado's book called In the Eye of the Storm, he shares the story about Chippy the parakeet. His day started out like any other day until his owner decided that she wanted to clean his cage with the vacuum cleaner. So as she prepared to clean the cage, she took the end attachment off the vacuum cleaner hose and stuck it right inside the cage. As she began cleaning, the telephone rang. And so as she turned her attention to answer the phone, she turned her attention away from the cage. And the next thing she knew, she heard a thump and turned back to see that she had sucked Chippy up into the vacuum cleaner. Well, of course, she's completely shocked. She drops the phone, drops the vacuum, turns it off, opens up the vacuum cleaner, tears open the bag to find Chippy alive, but certainly stunned. She pulls him out of the dust and the dander in the vacuum cleaner bag and runs over to the kitchen sink, turns the water on full blast, and puts Chippy right under the flow of the water. Once she's thoroughly convinced that he's cleaned and pulls him out of the water, she noticed that he's shaking and shivering, at which time she runs to the bathroom, grabs the blow dryer, and blasts him with the hot air. A few days later, she had related the story to her friend, and the friend said, "So by the way, how is Chippy doing?" And she said, "Well, he doesn't really sing much anymore. He just sits and stares." Perhaps you've had a day like that. Perhaps you know just how Chippy feels. Perhaps life has been moving along normally for you. Everything is predictable and just fine. And then all of a sudden, everything changes. The paycheck bounces. The report comes back with the answer that you didn't want to hear. The virus spreads. And life as you know it is completely changed. You find yourself being sucked up into an unknown place, feeling the effects of life, feeling the vacuum of darkness, feeling the cold water of circumstances that are out of your control, and dealing with a reality that you've never dealt with before. You find that you've lost your song, that you're searching for the rhythm and for the melody of the life that you have loved and known for so long, only to find yourself in a place of questioning and wondering, what is next? How in the world do I take the next step in these circumstances that I currently find myself in? That's what we're going to talk about today. Jesus had a day that was very similar to that in his life. Today we're going to start looking at that in the book of Mark. Next to the day that Jesus went to the cross, this was probably the most stressful day in his life. All 4 of the Gospels talk about this day, the Gospels being Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the first 4 books of the New Testament. Each one of them records a portion, if not all, of this day. So knowing that this information has been recorded in each of those books lets us know it's a pretty big day in the life of Jesus. And so we're going to take a look at that today, beginning in the book of Mark. We're going to go to Mark chapter 6 today. So if you have your phone, feel free to grab it and open up your YouVersion Bible app, or grab your paper Bible and follow along with us. Now, I want to give you a little bit of background as we get started today so that you'll fully understand the importance of this day in the life of Jesus. You know, as I was reading and studying and getting ready for this and thinking about storms and circumstances that come along when we least expect them, sometimes, even though they feel unexpected to us, a storm can have been brewing in the background for quite some time. And that's a little bit of what we see happening here in Mark chapter 6. So if you've got your Bibles ready, go to Mark chapter 6, and we're going to start in verse 6 today. We're actually going to start in verse 30, excuse me, but I'm going to start telling you what happens in Mark chapter 6, verse 6. So Jesus and his group of friends, which we like to call the disciples, have been spending quite a bit of time together. They've been traveling from village to village, and as they go there, Jesus has been teaching and sharing. He's been healing people. He's been casting out demons. They've been really busy. But it's been an exciting time because Jesus has been pouring into the lives of his disciples. They've been watching him and learning from him. And at this point in the book of Mark, Jesus says to them, now it's your turn. I'm going to put you together in groups of 2, and I'm going to send you out together so that you all can go and do the things that you've seen me do. I've taught them to you, and now it's your turn to go and heal the sick and teach this message and cast out demons and reach out to the poor. This is what he's wanting them to do. This is what he's taught them to do. And so as they've watched his example of doing these things, they're thinking, oh, wow, this is it. Kind of like that first time that you get to drive the car by yourself, whether you've just gotten your learner's permit or your driver's license, there's that excitement of, now I get to try it for myself. Jesus is excited for them, and the disciples are excited to go out as well. So Jesus sends the disciples out, and while they are out, as we continue on in the book of Mark, in chapter 6, verse 14, we read where Jesus learns about the death of one of his dearest friends. Not only his dear friend, but his cousin, John the Baptist. Jesus learns that John the Baptist has just been beheaded by Herod the king. And not only that, but now Herod is asking questions about Jesus himself. Now, the importance of this is that the message of Jesus and what he was doing were becoming very controversial during that time. Anytime a figure took attention away from the government or the king or the religious leaders of the time, it did not go well. And so as Jesus is traveling and teaching, he's gathering a lot of attention. And so the fact that Herod is asking, who is this Jesus, means that Jesus' life is to the point that it could be in danger. So he hears about John the Baptist being killed, and then he finds out that Herod is asking about him as well. And this is where the storm begins. This is where the storm begins in this day in the life of Jesus. Now, I want to share just a little bit more with you about the importance of the life of John the Baptist. If you go back to Luke chapter 1, which is a great thing for you to go back and check out on your own, you'll see the account of Zechariah, who was a priest, and his wife Elizabeth. They were very old in age and had never had any children, and then they find out that they're going to have a child. And the child that is born to them, his name is John the Baptist. And the entire purpose of John the Baptist's life is to prepare the way for Jesus when he is born and in his ministry. And Jesus and John are actually cousins, and so they probably grew up together, spent time together as children, had a relationship with one another. And then John the Baptist, as he grew up and got older, began to travel and tell people, Jesus is coming, the Messiah is coming. I'm here to prepare the way for him. And so when Jesus learns that John the Baptist's life has been taken, it's a great loss for him. He's grieving. He's heartbroken. This is someone who was so special in his life. Everything about John's life prepared the way for Jesus. And so as Jesus hears this news, he is sucked into that dark place of sadness and of grief. And many of you know exactly how that feels. You know what it feels like to lose someone who is so close to you. Whether suddenly or over a long period of time, it's devastating. It's life-changing. And there's no process, there's nothing in life that affects you the way grief does. And Jesus knows exactly how that feels, because in this day in his life, he entered the storm of grief. So right after learning the news about John the Baptist being killed, the disciples come back from their time away where they've been traveling and teaching and doing all the things that Jesus sent them out to do. And this is where we're going to start in reading today. We're going to be in the book of Mark, chapter 6, and we're going to start in verse 32. And this is what it says. The apostles returned to Jesus from their ministry tour and told him all they had done and taught. And Jesus said, "Let's go off by ourselves to a quiet place and rest a while." He said this because there were so many people coming and going that Jesus and his apostles didn't even have time to eat. And so they left by boat for a quiet place where they could be alone. Now, I want you to picture this scene with me. So the disciples come back. Jesus has just learned the news about John the Baptist. He is sad, he is grieving, and the disciples come back so excited. Kind of like when a child comes to you and says, "Oh, I can't wait to tell you this. I learned to ride my bike," or "I learned to hit a ball," or whatever. They can't wait to tell Jesus what they've done. And Jesus, knowing this news, I'm not sure if the disciples knew whether or not John the Baptist had been killed, but Jesus, in his time of grief and excited to see them, says, let's just get away for a little bit. Let's just go away and be by ourselves. You know, that's so significant and important because as we have times where we're dealing with lots of different circumstances, have you ever felt that way of, man, I just need a minute. I need a minute just to sit down and rest and think. And that's what's happening here. Actually, in the book of Matthew, there's some beautiful insight. It says that when Jesus got the news about John the Baptist, he immediately got into a boat and went away to a remote place. A remote place. I looked up the definition of remote, and I want to share it with you because I think it gives us some real insight to what that remote place is all about. The definition says a place that is far away from the main population, disconnected, distant, removed, remote. It's a word that we've all probably felt. It's a word that we've experienced. There's just that time sometimes when we need to get away from everyone else, from everything else, from all the distractions. We need a place of quietness and of stillness. And Jesus needed that. He knows exactly how that feels. So here in Mark, we see Jesus saying, let's go off to a quiet place and be by ourselves and rest for a while. And of course, it certainly makes sense knowing everything that's been going on. And don't miss the fact that back up in the scripture that we read, it says that the people were coming and going. There were people crowding around Jesus, crowding around the disciples, to the point that they didn't even have time to eat. Has your life ever been in that place where you've been so busy there's not even time to eat? So many details, so much happening around you, so much busyness. The world keeps coming. The demands keep demanding. The needs keep needing. But there are times when we have to find that remote place. We have to find that place of stillness and quiet. It's a journey that we must take. We must realize that the people are still going to be there. The needs are going to be there when we get back. But first, we must find rest and we must find quiet. So in verse 32, it says, so they left by boat for a quiet place where they could be alone. I just want to encourage you, when you find yourself in that place of grief or worry or fear, take some time to be alone. Take some time to process. The world can pressure us to filter things in a way that's not always healthy. So find that remote place. We're going to keep reading. We're going to keep on in verse 32. It says, but many people recognized them, so recognized Jesus and the disciples, and saw them leaving. The people saw them leaving. And people from many towns ran ahead along the shore and got there ahead of them. Jesus saw the huge crowd as he stepped from the boat, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And so he began teaching them many things. Y'all, Jesus can't catch a break. The disciples can't catch a break. Notice that it says the crowds were coming and going. They were all around. They recognized Jesus. They see the disciples. They see them get into the boat, and then they just take off on foot. They're just going to get there. They're like, wherever Jesus is going, that's where we want to be, and I want to get there before he does. And so when they arrive, as Jesus steps off the boat, as he's trying to get to his place of remote, the place where he can be alone, the place where he can grieve, the place where he can connect with his disciples who are so dear to him. He sees the people as he steps from the boat. And notice what it says. He has compassion for them. He has compassion on them. Even in this time when Jesus needed the place of remote, he steps off the boat, he feels compassion, and notice what he does. He begins teaching them many things. Jesus is in the middle of his own storm, yet he's surrounded by the crowd that's coming and going. He's surrounded by his disciples who are saying, we want to tell you what happened. We want to tell you what happened. He's carrying this grief, and yet he continues to serve. He continues to love. He continues to have compassion on those who are around him. It's a beautiful picture of the heart of Jesus. That even in our storm, we can still love, we can still serve. He had compassion on the people, and he began to teach them many things. I also want to point out to you that Jesus sees the crowd. This is going to become important to us in just a little bit. So the crowd sees Jesus and they follow him. And as he steps off the boat, he sees the crowd. It's really important. He teaches, he heals. It was a long day of ministry. There were so many people there. I want us to quickly look at Mark chapter 6, verse 35. And it points out, late in the afternoon, his disciples came to him and said, this is there's the word, remote place, and it's already getting late. So Jesus was traveling to the place of remote. The disciples are with him. The people see and recognize them. They run ahead and get to the place of remote so that when Jesus steps off the boat, they're already there. He spends the day teaching them, loving them, having compassion on them. And it comes to late in the afternoon, and the disciple says, hey, Jesus, it's getting late. Like, I'm sure in their minds they're thinking, we haven't had a chance to tell you what we've done yet. We haven't told you about our travels and the things that we've experienced. And so the disciples are pressing in on Jesus. The crowd is pressing in for what he can give to them in this remote place. He spent his day serving and giving and loving. And then the disciples basically say, you know, it's getting kind of late. Why don't we just tell these people to head on home? We've spent the day serving them. They're hungry. They want food, but we're in a remote place, so there's no place for us to get any food around here. And Jesus, in his wisdom, takes this time. He sees the teachable moment. And of course, these disciples, his friends, are also his students. So he notices the opportunity to make a point to them, and he says, well, why don't you feed them? Why don't you give them something to eat? Now, mind you, this is a really large crowd. The Bible points out that there are 5,000 men plus the families that have come with them. This crowd could have been as large as 25,000 people. And here they are in the place of remote. As they begin looking around, they find out that there's just a little bit of food there, of a few loaves of bread and a couple of pieces of fish. And Jesus prays over the food and multiplies it and feeds everyone. Everyone gets to eat. Let's look at Mark 6:42. This is such a beautiful verse in the context of this story. Now, I just want you to use your imagination here. Think about a crowd of 25,000 people. Think about Jesus' disciples being with him. Think about Jesus there. Here they are in this remote place, no place to run out and grab a bite to eat. Jesus grabs this meager amount of food, this little bit of bread and this little bit of fish. He prays over it. They distribute it out through the people, and then there are baskets of food left over. And we read in Mark 6:42, it says, they all ate as much as they wanted. They all ate as much as they wanted. This wasn't a case where you've got your kids in the back seat of the car and you're driving through a restaurant looking at the dollar menu thinking, I've got $3, how do I feed 3 kids in the back seat with a burger and some fries? You each get 2 bites and 4 French fries, and that's all you got. That's not the situation that we see here. Everyone ate until they were full. They all had as much as they wanted. Just a couple of weeks ago, I had the opportunity to cook a meal for my family. It's not one of my favorite activities by far, but probably like many of you, our family has been together a lot, and my oldest son has returned home from college. He's been working at a fancy restaurant for the past year, and they serve these meals that are unbelievably delicious and beautiful. And I'm not sure if he came home thinking that all of a sudden I had gained magic cooking skills, but he has come up with all of these great ideas as far as things to eat and try. So we decided to prepare a special meal one evening to celebrate a goal that had been met. And my oldest son is saying, oh, well, you should try to make this sauce, and you should use this certain type of cheese, and oh, let's make this type of chicken. And so we did, but the meal started, I started prepping the meal at 4:30 in the afternoon. By the time the meal was cooked, we sat down to eat, and then we finished cleaning up. It was 8:30 at night, just for one meal. I was completely exhausted. I left the kitchen throwing my hands up going, was this really all worth it in the first place? But I will tell you, it was so delicious. It was a wonderful meal. It was one of those meals where you just want to kind of lean back in your chair after it's over and say, oh my gosh, that was so good. I'm stuffed. And that's what we see here. Everyone ate until they were full. They were satisfied. The importance of that is so important in our lives today as well. Jesus fed them a miracle. They were part of the process of watching Jesus do something that was unique and special in their lives. They ate as much as they wanted, including the disciples. And then, shortly after being satisfied, the testing comes. You know, maybe that's the way Chippy the parakeet felt in the beginning. His life was good. He was satisfied. And then comes the vacuum cleaner and the cold water and the blow dryer. Maybe you feel that way too. Maybe you feel like, man, I'm good. I'm fine. I'm satisfied. And then the testing comes. Maybe you've been in a great place in your relationship with your family and in your relationship with Jesus. You've been praying. You've been in the Word. You're growing. And then the testing comes. We shouldn't be surprised by that. It's one of the ways that Jesus keeps us close to him. It's one of the ways that he reminds us that he is faithful and he's in control. Let's keep reading and see what happens next. We're in Mark chapter 6, starting in verse 45. Immediately after this, so immediately after everyone had eaten and was satisfied, Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and head across the lake to Bethsaida, while he sent the people home. So he says to the disciples, just get in the boat and go. Y'all just go on. And so the people that he has compassion on and he's been loving all day long, then he begins to send them home. After telling everyone goodbye, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. So Jesus makes sure that everyone is taken care of. Disciples, get in the boat, go. People that have come, thanks for coming. Goodbye, everyone, go. And now the day is done. Or so it seems. It's his turn. He finally has the chance to be alone. He goes up in the hills by himself to pray. The opportunity has come for him to run to his Father, for him to sit at his feet, for him to pour out his heart and tell him what is going on in his own life. Just like the crowd wanted to be around Jesus and say, this is what's going on in my life. Just like the disciples came and wanted to tell Jesus all that had happened, Jesus needed to run to his Father and do the same thing. Jesus did not give up on pursuing his time with his Father. Don't miss that truth. And don't let that truth slide out of your life or pass you by in any way. When you are in the storm, you must run to the Father. Even after a stress-filled day, a day of worry, a day of demands, Jesus runs to his Father. He sits at his feet. He finds the retreat that he needs. He finds the place to pour out what is on his mind. You need it too. I need it. We desperately need to sit at the feet of the Father. Don't stop pursuing him. Don't stop running after him. Don't stop looking for him. In the middle of your storm, run to your Father. Can we make it through on our own? Absolutely, we could. Could we muscle it out? Could we power it through? Sure, we could. But why? Why would we want to do that when the heart of the Father says, come and be with me? And that's exactly where we find Jesus. It's a beautiful picture of God's faithfulness to his own Son. As the night rolls on, Jesus is spending time praying, being alone, finding that time and solitude that he needs. But things aren't so calm in other places. We're going to keep reading in Mark chapter 6, starting in verse 47. Late that night, the disciples were in their boat in the middle of the lake, and Jesus was alone on the land, in the place of remote. He saw that they were in serious trouble. So Jesus sees that the disciples are in serious trouble, rowing hard and struggling against the wind and the waves. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them walking on the water. He intended to go past them, but when they saw him walking on the water, they cried out in terror, thinking he was a ghost. They were all terrified when they saw them, but when Jesus spoke to them at once, he said, "Don't be afraid. Take courage. I am here." Then he climbed into the boat, and the wind stopped. It stopped. I want us to pay close attention to verse 48. It says, he saw they were in serious trouble, rowing hard and struggling against the wind and the waves. Jesus saw. A few minutes earlier, I was telling you to let's take note. Let's remember about the things that were seen in this passage and in these events that we're studying. Remember that the people saw Jesus and the disciples get on the boat. When they got to the remote place, Jesus saw the people waiting for him. And here, even in the place of remote, Jesus saw that the disciples were in serious trouble. It doesn't just say that they were kind of dealing with a little bit of wind here. He says they're in serious trouble. They are rowing hard and struggling against the wind and the waves. Don't miss the fact that even though Jesus is taking time to be in the place of remote with his own Father, he still sees what the disciples are going through. Isn't that awesome? He sees them from afar, and it is no different with us today. If you are wondering if Jesus sees you, the answer is yes. If you are wondering if he sees you struggling, the answer is yes. If you are thinking, oh my gosh, does he see that I'm fighting the wind and the waves? The answer is yes. He knows the storm that you are in. He sees you. He saw the people in the crowd. He sees. He knows. He saw from the remote place. Let's find out what he does. In verse 48, we read, about 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them walking on the water. He intended to go past them, but when they saw him walking on the water, they cried out in terror, thinking it's a ghost. They were terrified and when they saw him, but Jesus spoke to them at once, saying, "Do not be afraid. Take courage, I am here." Then he climbed into the boat. Notice what happens after Jesus sees them. Jesus saw them. He leaves the place of remote. He comes off the mountain. He walks across the lake to enter the storm with them. He doesn't just stay up on the mountain thinking, oh man, that is too bad. They are in one heck of a storm down there. No. Jesus leaves the place where he's gone to be in the remote place, to be filled up by his Father, to pour out his cares, and then he immediately begins caring for others again. That's the beauty of what our time alone with God does for us. We pour out our hearts to him. He pours his goodness and faithfulness into us and allows us to keep going. And that's exactly what Jesus does. He comes off the mountain, he sees them in the storm, he sees their need, and he makes his way toward them. And that brings us to our big idea for today. When you are in your storm, let Jesus in your boat. Don't try to do it on your own. Don't keep fighting and struggling the wind and the waves on your own. He sees you and he knows. And he's coming off the mountain and he's walking on the water and he's coming right toward you. Jesus saw the disciples before he saw them. Notice that it says he saw they were struggling and he comes to them walking on the water. And when they saw him, what was their reaction? They were terrified. Oh my gosh, it's a ghost. It's so funny to me to think about them seeing a man walking on the water and not immediately going, whoa, good, Jesus made it. No, they're terrified. They're crying out, oh my goodness, it's a ghost. And aren't we so much like that way in times of uncertainty and in times of storm? We allow our fears to overrule our faith. We question everything, and more often than not, the questions that we have, we come up with the complete wrong answer. We choose the wrong letter in the multiple choice. We choose the thing that makes the least amount of sense to hang on to. And so Jesus is walking toward them, and the disciples are no different in this moment. Rather than recognizing their friend and their teacher, the one who has sent them out to teach in his name, to minister to others in his name, they don't recognize him. Instead, they think, oh, it's a ghost. Does it make you wonder, how well do I really know him? Do I only know him in the times when he's right there with me and everything is smooth and simple and serene and calm? Or do I recognize him in the storm as well? Will I know it when he comes to me? When you invest in your relationship with him, when you spend time with him in that place of remote, you'll know him. And just to be sure they don't miss him, because he was intending to walk by. Maybe he was going to go on ahead of them to wherever they were going because he knew they were going to be okay. Maybe he was going to meet them there and be like, hey guys, glad you made it. Either way, he comes to them and says in verse 50, it says, Jesus spoke to them at once. Don't be afraid, he said. Take courage. I am here. Then he climbed into the boat and the wind stopped. When you're in the storm, let Jesus in the boat. Our big idea for today, when you're in the storm, let Jesus in the boat. Jesus climbs into the boat and he speaks the command that we hear most often in the Bible. Do not be afraid. Don't be afraid. Take courage. I'm here. I'm in the boat with you. The boat won't sink. If you are with me, then you are safe. I've got you. When you are in the storm, let Jesus in the boat. As he climbs into the boat, the wind stops. It doesn't say that the storm slowly died down until it wasn't there anymore. It says the storm stopped. And no doubt the boat may have kept on rocking even though the storm had stopped. And isn't that the way we feel sometimes? Sometimes the storm has passed, but our lives are still rocking back and forth. Our hearts and our emotions are still dealing with everything that has happened to us. Just because the storm has ended doesn't mean that we don't still feel the effects of it. As a matter of fact, let's keep going because in verse 52, we're about to see that. It says, the disciples, they were totally amazed, for they still didn't understand the significance of the miracle of the loaves. Their hearts were too hard to take it in. Less than 24 hours from the miraculous feeding of the multitudes, the disciples did not understand all that had happened. Y'all, they had been there. They had seen the crowds. They had talked to them. They had gathered up that meager amount of food and watched Jesus bless it and serve 25,000 people. And yet they did not understand the significance. They couldn't even grasp it all. And sometimes that's where we find ourselves after a storm, in the midst of a storm. We can't even grasp it all. Our hearts and our minds are reeling. Even though they served the food, even though they ate the fish, even though they were full on the blessing, they still had to endure the testing. They still had to come through the storm. They were right in step with Jesus until they weren't, until their circumstances caused them to choose faith over fear. And you know what this feels like. You've been in a storm like this. Maybe you're in one right now. Maybe you're in the place of a dream that has never come true. Maybe you're in a place with a habit that you've wrestled with and you're trying to break. Maybe there's forgiveness that you need to give. Maybe you're struggling with secret sin. Perhaps you are in the middle of a nasty divorce. Maybe you've just got some burden that you need to release. You're dealing with disappointment and with failure and with loss. Maybe you're in quarantine. You're in the storm. You're struggling against the winds and the waves. But Jesus sees you, and he will come and he will climb in the boat, and the wind will stop. This is the faithfulness of our God. Do not be afraid. Take courage. If you're lacking on courage, he says, it's okay. I've got plenty. Take some of mine. Take courage. I am here. I'm here. He has plenty for you. He sees you. He comes to you. I want to share a verse with you in the book of Isaiah, chapter 43, verse 2. It says, when you go through deep waters, I will be with you. When you go through rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. When you're in the storm, he's got you. He's not asleep. He's not distracted. He's not too busy. He remains faithful to you, and he will have, as he did for the crowd, compassion. He will come to you and meet you. He knows your needs. Just as he met the multitude on the hills of Remote, he will meet you there, and he will meet your needs until you've had all you wanted and you are satisfied. When you're in the storm, let Jesus in your boat. Let's pray. God, how we thank you for your faithfulness to us in the middle of our storms. Even as we've read today, Jesus was in the middle of his own personal storm, and the circumstances of life just kept coming. And he kept being faithful to the call. He kept loving. He kept serving. He had compassion. He met needs. And in the end, he still pursued his time with you, Father. He still pursued to the place of Remote, to the place of sitting and drawing from you and being fed. And then he went out and calmed another storm. So today, help us to remember that when we find ourselves in a storm, we want to begin by pursuing you. We want to begin by running to the place of Remote and pouring out our heart and our fears and our cares and our worries and our doubts. We want to tell you all about it because you are there for us and you're faithful. But sometimes, even in the midst of that, the storm is still raging. So help us to know that you are on the way, that you see us and you come to us. And as you climb into the boat, the wind stops. There is nothing that is too difficult for you. There is nothing out of your sight. There is nothing beyond your control. You see us and you know. And you are with us in deep waters. Thank you. Thank you that you are with us in all things. And help us to let you in the boat. We love you, Lord. Amen.
There's a way back home for the wandering soul. There's a peaceful calm for the restless one. And if you're so far gone, you can't see the shore, well, just lift your eyes and look to the Lord. 'Cause he's walking on the water. He'll calm your raging seas. No, you don't have to look no farther. He's the hope that you need. If your sails are torn and tattered, and the storm just won't cease, so take hold of the hand of the Savior, 'cause he's the anchor of peace. Oh, he's the anchor of peace. I was breaking down at the end of my road, when the sweetest sound silenced the noise. Oh, and he's the Prince of Peace. The waves know his voice. So just lift your eyes and look to the Lord, 'cause he's walking on the water. He'll calm your raging seas. No, you don't have to look no farther. He's the hope that you need. If your sails are torn and tattered, and the storm just won't cease, so take hold of the hand of the Savior, 'cause he's the anchor of peace. Oh, he's the anchor of peace. I was far from the peaceful shore, falling to the hopeless floor. Oh, the wreckage of the fallout, there was no way out. Then I saw the lighthouse. I was sinking when I felt your hand. You put my feet back on dry land. When I was so far down, love made a way out. I thank God for the lighthouse. Yeah, 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 yeah. 'Cause he's walking on the water. He'll calm your raging seas. No, you don't have to look no farther. He's the hope that you need. Or if your sails are torn and tattered, and the storm just won't cease, so take hold of the hand of the Savior, 'cause he's the anchor of peace. Oh, he's the anchor of peace. Yeah, 'cause he's walking on the water. He'll calm your raging seas. No, you don't have to look no further. He's the hope that you need. And if your sails are torn and tattered, the storm just won't cease, so take hold of the hand of the Savior, 'cause he's the anchor of peace. Oh, he's the anchor of peace, 'cause he's the anchor of peace.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Once again, we would love to wish a very happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers out there. We also have a plan for your family. To find out that plan, visit oneChurch.tv/kids for all things kids ministry, and oneChurch.tv/students for all things student ministry. We're so glad that we got to spend this time with you today. Now go be the church.